I am recording today because Pastor Thorsten is dying to know what I'm going to say about the Emsland. So today's topic is, with my sabbatical, I did a few things before I traveled to Europe, and we talked about that last week. When I got to Europe, I went to the Lutheran World Federation event in Krakow, and then went to Berlin and Lübeck, which is where we pick up today. You can see it at the top of the red trail there. But then October, which was 5 Sundays this last year, I was in the Emsland with Pastor Thorsten. So today's topic is the Emsland with Pastor Thorsten, and then next week will be the other stuff that happened after Pastor Thorsten and when I returned here. So kind of 3 steps. But Pastor Thorsten, I stayed with him in the parsonage, and I assisted in worship on Sunday mornings, which is kind of exciting because German is not my first language. And so I was limited to things that I could read and had an opportunity to practice a bit in getting into it. Spontaneous speaking I could do in a casual environment, but with much forgiveness and occasional assistance, but not, say, to do a sermon or something like that would have been beyond my ability to do it. So you can see Berlin there on the right. I went from Berlin to Lübeck, and then from Lübeck to Lingen. You can see it kind of at the end of the check mark. Lingen is a town of about 60,000. It is the hometown of Pastor Thorsten. He serves 2 parishes, which have several congregations in each, a couple, but really only one church in each that have weekly Sunday services. So it was kind of show up at the one, do church, climb in the car, drive to the other one, and do church. The first one was the one not where he lived, which he's only had for the last 8 to 10 years or so. And then the second service was the one where he lives. And so, and I'll show those pictures in a minute. This trip was taken, I think, with 6 trains, which was tedious. Kind of fun, but kind of tedious. So I have a lot of pictures, and some of them I'm going to kind of blow through rather quickly in an effort to kind of get through the time. This is what 6 trains with your luggage looks like in Germany. Staking out your place, and frightful that you're going to have to wrestle some German off of your suitcase, but there you go. I showed this one as the last slide last week. Moin is the traditional greeting any time of day, any occasion, for any purpose in the northeastern part of Germany. Think Hamburg and west, kind of in the north there. Not the northeast. Pastor Friederike's homeland, she says their greeting is Tag, like Guten Tag, but Tag is how they will often greet one another. But moin, 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 moin. Pass somebody on the sidewalk, moin. That's what you would say. And then a traditional German greeting involves beer. So this was the first dinner there as we're in the yard of the parsonage there as Thorsten has received me. I showed up on a Saturday, so immediately to church. This is his church in Twist, T-W-I-S-T, Twist, we would say. And that's the main congregation in that parish. That's where he has a Sunday service every week. Here you can see the interior of it. The first Sunday I was there was a special service for the intake of the new confirmands. So we would say kind of like 6th graders coming in. So one of the things to say, and I'm going to talk kind of fast, but definitely raise your hand if you have a question. The German church and the American church are simply different. The German church is much more top-down than our church is. It is also financed by your income taxes. So there's a line on your 1040 when April 15 rolls around that down at the bottom says church tax, the Kirchsteuer. And when you move to a new community, you go in and check in, because Germans like to have you check in and fill out forms and stuff like this. And one of the questions they'd ask is, would you like to continue to pay the Steuer, the tax? And are you then, if the answer is yes, are you Protestant or Catholic? Because then the money goes different ways depending on that. Baptist, they pass a plate. So, but as far as income tax, so I was thinking for Pastor Thorsten, his level of stress during the pandemic over and against his American counterparts was very different. It would be like a teacher at El Carmelo wondering if the school would fold. It's just, no, it's just going to keep going on. The rule in at least his area of Germany is that you must have 1,600 members. So a household, like my house would be 5, so members, to qualify to have a full-time pastor. So the taxes of all of those 1,600 people justify a full-time pastor. Pastor Thorsten was alone in his parish, and also was given this parish, which had 1,000 members, so it had fallen below the 1,600 threshold. So he has 2,600 members. Now on a Sunday in the United States, we'd say, okay, so about 600 to 800 people on a Sunday. Not quite, much smaller groups. However, the thing I want you to consider is that the place of the church in German culture is simply different. So in his community, if we were to compare it to Grace, for instance, we have about 350, 400 members, kind of in that range, but we get about 120 to 130 people on a Sunday. It's like, wow. So why do they get so few? Well, the fact of the matter is, in Palo Alto, we see the same people very often, you all. In Germany, it's different. There is that subset of people, but it's a much smaller percentage. However, I would guess in a community like Palo Alto, we probably see a fraction of a percent of the territory of Palo Alto here on a given Sunday in a year. Pastor Thorsten's parish, he probably sees maybe as much as 50% of his community inside his church. Probably only once. There's a subset, of course, that are there every week. But when you're talking 1,600, he's got confirmation for 1,600. He's got funerals for 1,600. He's got baptisms for 1,600. He does services where the kids from El Carmelo come over and do church with the teachers in the sanctuary, because that's how they do it there. When Pastor Thorsten was new here, he said, so how often do the kids from El Carmelo come over here for services? And I was like, yeah, no, that's against the law. So the church just holds a different place in society, and it's very difficult to just apples to apples compare the two. It's hard to do that. Now here I'm going to give you a little orientation. This is the main driveway to the church. It looks like a residential driveway. There's parking in the back for maybe 4 or 5 cars. The red roof building to the right is the parsonage. Looking to my right, from that same perspective, you now see the parsonage there is the building on the left. I'm catching the corner of it. The building next to it is the Gemeinde house, the community house. This is the place where they have their classrooms. They have a number of nice rooms, probably 3 rooms that are very nice, large rooms with table and chair setups. They have a kitchen, restrooms there. Upstairs, they have a kind of a cool dormered, windowed kind of space that is where their council meets and whatnot. I'll show you a picture of that a little later here. But they are separate buildings on separate properties. So keep that in mind. This is, if you were here and were to walk back and just to the right of the white building, which is the church, and turn around and look back right where I'm standing right now, you would see this angle. So the back of the parsonage there on the left and the church on the right. The church building is the church. Punkt. Full stop. It is 4 walls and a sacristy. That's the whole thing. That church can probably seat, I would guess, maybe 100, 125, if I had to guess. And here is me on my first Sunday. We'll see if this works. Good morning. Ich heiße Pastor Matt Smuts und ich komme aus den USA. Meine Heimat ist die Stadt Chicago und ich bin seit 27 Jahren Pastor. Seit 2006 bin ich an der Grace Lutheran Church in Palo Alto, Kalifornien, als Pastor tätig. Palo Alto ist neben San Francisco in der Silicon Valley. Vielleicht finden Sie es interessant, dass meine Kollegin dort eine Pastorin aus der Nordkirche aus Boston ist. Ich bin mit meiner Frau Marielle verheiratet und zusammen haben wir 3 erwachsene Kinder, den 27-jährigen Eli, die 24-jährigen Inger und die 18-jährige Annika. Pastor Jacobs war letztes Jahr bei uns in Kalifornien für seine Sabbatical-Zeit, seine Studienzeit. Wir hatten eine schöne Zeit gehabt und es war auch für ihn eine tolle Zeit, unsere Gemeindedienste und die Gemeinschaft kennenzulernen. Ich bin sehr aufgeregt, diesen Monat hier mit ihm und euch zu verbringen. Ich freue mich darauf, uns kennenzulernen. Ich hoffe auch, während dieser Zeit mein Deutsch zu verbessern, weil es jetzt nicht so gut ist. Wenn ihr Geduld habt, Deutsch mit mir zu sprechen, dann würde ich sehr dankbar sein. Aber langsam bitte. Dankeschön. Okay. So, ein bisschen Deutsch. At the end there, I said I would love it if you would speak German with me because my German is not so great, but slowly, please. They said, you speak great German. I said, I read great German. It's not quite the same thing. Yes?
So how much English do they speak?
So in the Emsland, they don't speak a lot of English. The Emsland is not, forgive me, Thorsten, is not a big tourist area. There's not a ton of outside traffic, and so there's not as much pressure to learn English. They learn it in school for sure, but often don't have cause to use it as an adult, and so like a lot of your childhood skills, they tend to fade away. With the so I was forced to use a fair amount of German, which was great, actually. This is the first year confirmands in the church by Pastor Thorsten's house. Yeah.
It looks like there's folding doors
Mm-hmm.
in front of the altar. Do they close that up?
Yeah, and then it can be used kind of as a little bit of a fellowship space or used for different purposes. There's the only plumbing in the entire building is a sink in the sacristy. So I don't quite know how else it would be used, but those certainly close and close away the altar space. Yeah. This is interesting. Diese Kirche ist ein Geschenk. This church is a gift der lutherischen Glaubenbrüder in America, of the Lutheran faith siblings in America. Erbaut 1950, so built in 1950, eingeweiht the 15th of October 1950. I'm assuming that means dedicated. I'm not quite sure about that, but I think that's what that word means. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so his church is 1 year older than Grace, primarily founded by, it's a Catholic area, which is why the church is so young. Many of the Lutheran churches in that area were from about that era. That has to do with post-war refugee relocation. In that area, it often was ethnic Germans from territory that belonged to Russia, and they were relocated, they were Protestants, to this area, and they said, hey, we're not going to go to the Catholic Church. And this would have been part of kind of unofficial American Reconstruction in many ways. His church also has a cemetery, which is kind of interesting. The very first day I then went to a installation of a pastor. The normal outfit for the German clergy is the black robe with the preaching tabs, not the white robe. I think that's a Catholic priest in the back in the white. So Thorsten wears white in his parishes often, kind of in an ecumenical and in the wider Lutheran world, the use of it. I don't know if this is breakfast or dinner. I think it's breakfast. They often look similar. It's often cold cuts, cheese, Brotchen, the bread rolls, which are fabulous. Pastor Thorsten had quite the itinerary for me. We saw, I had a calendar when I showed up, and we had things to do, people to see. If the county in Santa Clara County had a mayor, this would be him. So this is the, not the Kirchenkreis, it's the Landkreis. So Kreis means like circle or circuit or something like that. So that would be the equivalent of a county for us. And so I had a chance to visit with him and notice the cross on the wall in the public building, because that's how you do it. On the way out, the mayor is there on the far right, and we happened to bump into his next appointment, who was the finance minister for the state. This would be like the finance minister of California. I was well photographed while I was in the Emsland, so it was difficult to sort through photos. Pastor Thorsten was kind enough to get me a bike, and so there I was. The Emsland is kind of the Iowa of Germany in many ways. Dahlem is a town of about 12,000 people. It's very reminiscent to my first parish, actually, a town roughly of similar size. Here I am. On the left there is the mayor of Dahlem, which is the town there. Then I had a chance to visit with the principal at one of the local gymnasium. It looks like gymnasium. That is, they have tracks. They have schools that track you towards trades and schools that track you towards universities. So this gymnasium is university tracked students. Classrooms there, Mensa, I love that. That's the cafeteria. And then this I just thought was funny. You'll notice that it's the cabinet under the stairs. So this is Pastor Matt at confirmation. They are riveted. Actually, they look pretty riveted here, right? So our field trip was to the funeral home. Pastor Matt shopping at the funeral home, trying to see if it'll fit in the overhead compartment. I also had a chance later in the trip to visit an outdoor cemetery. One thing I wanted to say just quickly here is that in Germany, they do something fascinating. You can read a little bit more about it on my blog. And just for those of you who missed the announcement earlier, MatthewSmuts.net, 2 T's in Matthew, 1 T in Smuts, but is a blog of this. So I won't go into a ton of detail, but as an American, this was very unusual to me. You rent your grave for 25 or 30 years. So everything in this room is compostable, including what goes inside of it. And after 25 or 30 years, they've decided that you're no longer actively using the grave. And so often they will allow the family to rent it again if they choose. Most of the time, they do not. So the headstone will be removed, and that grave is now free for the next person's use. So generally speaking, unless you're a king from the 1800s, there is no, oh, we're going back to the cemetery to see where great grandma so-and-so was buried. That's not a thing, because now it's John Watkins is in there. And it's just a fascinating thing. From an American perspective, it was kind of like, wow, okay, there you go. So different traditions, different practices. This is the local public kindergarten, over for blessings from the pastors, like you do. Now this is the Kirchenkreis. This would be like our conference. 28 congregations. This is only half of the facility that oversees those 28 congregations. They have 25 staff. I'm assuming most of them are not full-time, but nonetheless, they have 25 staff to oversee 28 congregations. In our conference, the dean, that's a pastor who usually didn't show up at the meeting and then got picked to be the dean and is the one responsible for the monthly emails to get people to show up for the conference coffee. Here, it's a full-time job. I suspect that this has something to do with the Steuer, the tax, and there's a lot of things. One of the things about this is I was never at a church that was in disrepair. Never. Their churches sometimes maybe needed a little updating, different color paint, or some things maybe looked old, but everything was in perfectly good repair, and that was consistent everywhere I went.
So would this be like our synod?
No.
No.
It would be like the 21 congregations between Los Altos and San Francisco. I told the superintendent, I said, if I were to find a building that big for administrative purposes in the ELCA, I'd have to go to our national offices. There's not a bishop's office in the entire ELCA that's this big. From inside, Pastor Matt talking energetically with the superintendent. Documentation. And then this one I thought you might find interesting. They put a weekly video blog together, and it was kind of fun. So spontaneously they said, "Hey, we need you to say something." And I was like, "Okay." Did I lose my?
How long had you been there then?
I'd been there a week or more.
Okay.
Why is this not?
Okay.
So the pastor at the church is not responsible for that.
Correct.
Somebody else takes care of it. They don't have to worry about it.
Correct. Hello, I'm Pastor Matt Smuts from Grace Lutheran Church in Palo Alto, California. I am a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which is a sister church to the Hanover Landeskirche. And it's been exciting to be here for the last week. I am here for the month of October on a return visit to Pastor Thorsten Jacobs, who came to visit my congregation in 2021. I am learning about your church here and the things that are similar and things that are different. This is just off the cuff. It has been fascinating to learn about the things that are the same. We worship on Sundays, we share sermons, we visit the sick in the hospital. We do all kinds of things in common, but our church structures are very different in the way in which we operate. I think one of the biggest findings that I have had since being here is that in the United States, we are a more entrepreneurial church. The congregations are much more independent, which presents opportunities, but also potential challenges, as we do not have the same level of outside support to make our congregations succeed. In Silicon Valley, we are very blessed by the amount of support that we have. My congregation is a large congregation by California standards. We have about 350 members in 150 households. On a typical Sunday, we might worship 120 people in our service. You might find it interesting that with Silicon Valley, there are a lot of people from all over the world. In fact, there are 60,000 German citizens that live near San Francisco. My associate or assistant pastor actually is from Rostock and is a pastor of the Word. About 1/3 of my kids speak German at home, which is unusual for the United States, but not surprising in Silicon Valley. I'm looking forward to these remaining 3 weeks, and I expect to learn a lot that I will take home, and we will see what I am able to bring back in a way that changes my church for the better. It's great to be here with you. Yeah, 5 out of 16 speak German, and beyond that, 2 others speak Finnish. So, yeah. Reserviert, reserved for the Pfarrer, the priest. Catholic Church. This is the local elementary school. This would be like El Carmelo coming over for the Thanksgiving service. The two Lutheran pastors on the outside, me in the middle, and then two Catholic ministry leaders there in the Catholic Church. Meeting the mayor at Tvist, which is the other town that his other parish is in. Pastor Matt practicing desperately before the next service. Pastor Thorsten's son Matis had ridden his bike from Dahlem to Croatia and got back and we had dinner. It was fabulous. You might recall he visited here towards the end of Pastor Thorsten's time. We took a quick visit to Leer, which is north, has a harbor. The swan being an image of the Lutheran Church. You can see it on the sign there at the top, one of the icons. Here's the inside of the church, kind of epic. This one I love. So I had a bratwurst, and they put it on this little paper plate that had this little piece of paper that you could tear off, and that was your handle to hold it then.
Oh.
Clever. Here we are in Leer, taking a look, harbor tour, so on, and at a castle nearby, and the world's smallest bridge. So we're going to move on to week 2 here.
Question on the Lutheran Church,
Mhm.
the Protestant.
Mhm.
So you're near the Netherlands there?
Yep.
So any Reformed churches too?
Absolutely, and they're part of the Steuer also.
The Protestant.
Exactly. So it gets divvied up. I'm sure there's a lot of care taken in how much is coming in and going in each direction and so on and so forth. Correct. Yeah, so usually you would see, particularly in that, most of northern Germany, you would see the Evangelische Kirche, the evangelical church, meaning Lutheran. When you start to get into more reformed areas, you'll see Evangelische Lutherische or Evangelische Reformed, REF. So you would see that. I wanted to show this picture because that's it. That's all the plumbing in the building. Need to go to the bathroom? There's probably one at your house. Plan ahead. He's got a kid helping with the service, which is kind of cool. Had a chance to chat a bit. Communion, you can see this is a lighter Sunday. So there we are, the 2 Sundays. This was Men's Sunday. So the men helped lead the service. And then we had a discussion afterwards at the parsonage. This was kind of cool. I led this discussion with a little help from Pastor Thorsten for probably 45 minutes, I would guess, in German, which was super fun. I'm sure it wasn't pretty, but they seemed to follow, and they didn't throw anything. So that seems like a good sign. Then in the afternoon, I would say, relative to my context here, I have never been in the car with my robe as many times in my life. Felt like every day we were getting the robe, throw it into the car, going somewhere. Never was there a situation where you might lead a service like this. It was always the robe, the stole, this kind of thing. This is a social service agency in town that's celebrating 10 years, 5 years, 25 years, I forget what it was. And so there was a little worship service and then celebration afterwards. The one on the far left is the local Catholic priest, one of the local priests. This is me talking to middle schoolers at the public middle school about faith and life and Christ and ministry and, like you do. So like I do over at JLS. So, and this is me talking to the principal afterwards. Dinner with some council members, friends. Not sure why this has stars on it. Here's the answer to your question, Bruce. Evangelische Reformed, you can see it there. You can also tell it's Reformed because the German Lutheran churches, the altars are universally still up against the forward wall. And so, which is a little awkward because that's not how they're used. So it'd be one thing if the priest was, or the pastor was still standing like this during communion, but universally they turn to lead communion like this, but the altar still faces the wall. In the Reformed church, it's much more of a table kind of scenario, and so you can definitely see the differences in the physical spaces. Chicken farm. So it's a rural area. This is bio, I think they called it, which we would call, what do you call it? Shoot. When you get milk that's not regular milk because it's organic. There we go. Thank you. So organic eggs, quite the thing. And so she runs this farm, like 15,000 chickens or something. 15,000 eggs a day, I want to say.
Oh, wow. Now, have they had any trouble with bird flu in Germany?
Uh,
Across the U.S., in Israel had big trouble?
don't know.
U.S., no, they didn't say.
Don't know. Yeah. This is, then we went to a dairy farm, which also produces biogas from the waste of the cows, which was interesting. One of the things that I noticed, having come from the Midwest and served in a rural area, it was not unusual at all for the homes to be attached physically to the barns. You virtually never see that in the United States, but there you saw that quite a bit. The guy on the right was the host for the day. He's kind of the head of the local farmers association. The guy on the left was the former association head, and it's his farm. That's where he lives. Dairy. Voila. And we got there just in time. I have a video, but we'll save that for another time. Then I went to the conference meeting. So this would be the Kirchenkreis. So this would be all the pastors getting together. Curiously, this was just before October 7, and we had just been, this pastor, who's the furthest one to the left there, had spent his sabbatical in the Holy Land and was sharing about his experiences there. So it was like kind of crazy timely. Here you can see a photo of him landing in Tel Aviv there. This is walk around town with him. A ministry of the parish and the community, Zwischenzeit, between time is kind of. So it's kind of a hangout place in the local community. Some art done. This is a Catholic church in the area that's just stunning. And I love how different places are different. You see the font is just on the floor. You know, in the United States, they would never do that because somebody could trip on it. Whereas in Germany, they just say, don't trip on it. So there you go. Just don't do it. Yeah, exactly. On the way back, we went to an old retreat center that had been updated recently. You could see there had been some damage, and they added this piece on the outside that is their chapel, which is just kind of stark and stunning. It's the interior courtyard there. Council. Now, one of the things, it's a little foreshadowing here. Notice at every council meeting, there are drinks at the table and anything you could want. Now, the drinks generally are supposed to stay in the bottle or be consumed. But what happened was, as I was cleaning up, I inadvertently dropped a Coke bottle on the floor, and it landed at exactly the right angle to completely explode up against the ceiling. And so you can see them cleaning up. It got in the light fixture. So I'm sure there will be, do you remember when that American pastor was here? And so here we are at a local nursing home leading worship. Again, this is all Thanksgiving related. So you notice like the pumpkins up front, and it's that kind of time. This is a game that we didn't get to play because it rained. It's kind of a bowling on the street. It involves a lot of beer, from what I can understand. And so instead it turned into dinner, which was great. We took a little ride on bikes out and about in the Emsland. It is a, they use the word moor, which is not incorrect, but we would say it's peat land. And so during the Second World War, they had Russian POWs digging out the peat for fuel in conditions that were very cold, very wet, very undernourished. We'll look at the cemetery related to that in a little bit here. here we are out and about. And then the Farmers Association Fall Festival, which of course, I mentioned this was in Germany, right? So, so there we are celebrating that. This kid on the far right, I forget the name of the group, but there's a Catholic priest next to him. It'd be kind of like 4-H vaguely, but it's a Catholic youth association specifically. Okay, moving on to the next week. One of the things that Pastor Thorsten took from here is coffee hour. They didn't do that there because, again, no bathrooms. But they started doing it. One of the things that's a challenge, though, in Germany is that they do fancy coffee. So anytime you do coffee, there's got to be a saucer, there's got to be a spoon, there's got to be it's a whole thing. You can't just roll up with your mug and, just kind of dump it in and walk away. So it becomes a whole production that requires tables and whatnot. But it was really cool to see how well it worked there. People stuck around and they chatted, and it was great. And I should mention that the back of the church had an actual space where you could do that. This was the only church that I ever saw that had a space where that could even be done. They don't have narthexes at all. You step in the door and it's pews. Boom, you're in the church. This was kind of interesting. I went for a walk on a Wednesday. Bells are a thing. The thing that's kind of interesting about it is that it was the midpoint of my time in the Emsland. It was precisely the midpoint of my time in Europe. And it was also exactly midpoint of my time on sabbatical. It was all, I didn't realize that until I heard the bell. Then I was like, wait, that's, yeah. So out and about, you can see the bike lane there, pavers everywhere. I've just seen people put in pavers. I'm like, there must be 8 billion cubic kilometers of pavers in that country. This is a newly restored visitor center for the Soviet prisoner of war camp. There were several of them up there. After the war, this housed Russian, German refugees that had been relocated to this area. So I was mentioning them earlier there. Kriegsgräberstätte. So I'm not quite sure what Städte means, but Krieg is war, Blitzkrieg, right? And lightning war. Gräber is a grave, so a war grave. This is where the Soviet POWs were buried. This was not a camp like Auschwitz, but there were a lot of Soviets that died because they weren't fed. They were working in the peat bogs in the wet, October through, like this, but colder, right? For months at a hit. And there are about 20,000 of them buried here. More kids, and then the Mutterkreis, as it's called, the mother's circle, the women's circle. So it was lunch. You can see they decorated the space. And of course, we had a little service, which again, alms, stoles, the whole shebang, the whole kit. So we went in. This is in the Gemeindehaus in the next property over from the church. So you get a little sense of the rooms that are there. It's a lovely space. Giethorn. I was trying to find a t-shirt with this logo on it. So he lives about 20 miles from the Netherlands. And Giethorn is famous, this tiny village that has like more canals per capita than any town in the Netherlands. It is bonkers. And so Smuts is a Dutch name, if you didn't know that. So it was kind of fun to be there, boat tour, because canals. So many of these homes are on islands, technically, because of the way it goes. So you got to have your bridge, otherwise it's a boat, which you have a boat also. But so you can see the bridges coming over. This is a Mennonite church, which is not, it's a cousin to our Mennonites, but I think would be more properly like a curious Presbyterian church here with a curious history. It's not Mennonite in the way we think of it, but it is Mennonite. But they have a color, Mennonite blue, which I just love this blue. It's super cool. It's like their council room. The whole place was set up with interactive things, and the church was just open, and you kind of go in, and they'd have you, what's inspiring you today? And you could, interact with it. It was kind of fun. So you see here the various places. So it wasn't unusual that they would have, say, cows in the old days in your house. So you'd see these houses, what they call camelback roof, where the house is like this, and then the roof would go up, which was the barn area. But occasionally they would need to take the cows further afield to graze, which I wish I could have seen that, because getting a cow onto a boat to go down the canal seems like that could have been a trick. But yeah. So we then took a day trip down to Munster, where Matthias, Thorsten's son, is studying. He is studying to become a PE and religion teacher, which is kind of hard for us to picture in an American context, but there it works. So he would be a physical education instructor, probably at a gymnasium, and also handle the religious instructions and coordinate with the local churches like you would at Gunn. Or not. This is one of the cathedrals in town. This one is fascinating. This is the main Catholic cathedral in town. You'll notice the stunning spire there. And here you'll notice there are, see if I can, cages. So they're kept for when the Anabaptists get out of hand. So I don't know how regular an occurrence that is today, but I don't know if that's just a reminder to the neighbors to behave. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but at any rate, inside the space is there, just kind of stunning. Choir was practicing. Yeah, just kind of amazing. The rest of Munster here. Oh, this is Munster, and then I head to Hanover, where there were a number of places where bombed out churches were kept in that condition as a reminder of the cost of war. Unseren Toten, our dead, is the memorial there. This is a bell that was gifted to the city of Hanover from the city of Hiroshima after the war. This is me with Pastor Dirk Stelter, who works for the national church, the Hanover Landeskirche. So it's that territory. It would be like the ELCA for us. I met him in Krakow, and we had lunch then in Hanover. And there's your surfing spot in Hanover, like you do. Here is and then you saw Evangelical Reformed. Here's Luth, you can see here. This is the bishop's cathedral, the Lutheran bishop. You can see the inside of the space here. It's really striking. Luther outside, in case you're not sure what kind of church it is. And then the fan bus to see Bremen play Dortmund in Dortmund. This was 3 hours on the bus. And like I said, Germany. And the stadium in Dortmund is the largest in Germany, seats 81,000 people, and it was a capacity crowd. See Thorsten keeping me well documented there. After the game. And then a baptism. The gentleman in the black leather jacket was being baptized. He was from near Leipzig, the eastern Germany, and was not baptized as a child. And so we had a lovely baptism there. Okay, I'm going to do the last piece here to finish up time in the Emsland. Here we are at the church in Tvist, the church in Dahlem. Get a little better sense of how large the space is physically. And actually, just to the left of that column, you can see that wooden plaque on the wall that I was reading from before that said this church was a gift from. This was Peace Sunday, which was 2 weeks after the attacks, so kind of a loaded. And I should say that Ukraine feels much closer when you're in Germany than it does here. So it's a whole thing.
Well, the Germans say that fighting for them.
Yeah.
They don't use their words.
Exactly. This is the leaningest tower in the world. The Guinness Book of World Records plaque there on the front. So if you've been to Italy and seen the Leaning Tower of Pisa, it is not the leaningest. So here, if you look, you can see this metal rod here stand. That, if you go straight up, is where the peak of the building is. You can see how far away from the wall that it is. So, I mean, the good news is it's not made out of brick or anything heavy. So so here you can see how the lean, it's bonkers. And when you lock it up, it's got a key. Don't know. That's a Doug Hobach question. One of the last things we did was go to a favorite place of Thorsten's, which was the island of Baltrum. This is a national park area there. These are basically very large sandbars, really. It's a string of islands up there that actually goes up towards Denmark a bit and all the way down into the Netherlands. And they're these kind of barrier islands, and they shift a lot over time. So they put a lot of mitigating measures in to try and stop erosion and things like that. This island does not allow cars. So everything is on foot, on bike, or if you're doing construction or anything, it's horses pulling wagons, which is crazy because you'll see some like 20-year-old kid with 2 horses and a wagon full of construction material, and you're like, this is just not a skill in the United States. So here we are. You can see the island. This is kind of the logo of the island, kind of their the bell outside the Lutheran church. Here's the main Lutheran church. You can see a ship up to the right. It's interesting. You don't think of the Germans as a real, sea power, so to speak. And so it's interesting to be up along the coast and seeing some of that history. This is the ceiling of the Catholic Church. I have probably 100 pictures of church ceilings, but at any rate. This is some of the defenses against water here. Storms come in, they can slide partitions into those pieces there. Out on a hike. Old man by the sea. Yeah, here to the left, you can see the horses. And you can see, I think this might be trash pickup. So, yeah. And then a favorite thing to do is to walk in the mud, because when the tide is low, the water between the island and the mainland disappears. You're talking about not even a mile. It's not that far. And so the rangers will take out people with their boots and find all the things. This was the one funeral we did in October, which Thorsten says he typically does 2 a week. So one of the things that I should mention too about the cemeteries there is because they're rented, the families are expected to keep them up. So these are little miniature gardens that are maintained by the families. And even though that 25-year thing seems kind of strange to us, one of the things that's really cool about this is the sense of community and the regular connection of people who are maintaining these spaces over a 25-year window. There's this sense of kind of family obligation and we're going to do this. And so if it's your routine that you go the first Saturday of the month or whatever, odds are you run into the same people and you experienced a loss at a similar time they did, and so on. So it's really kind of a fascinating thing. This is just about the end here. This is the Catholic priest taking us out to breakfast here on a trip up to the sea to Meyer Werft. Werft is I'm forgetting the word. It's like a shipyard. A shipyard is kind of where they make ships. And by make ships, I mean like the biggest of them. So this is, Conrad, you would have found this place fascinating. So this is a Disney cruise ship that's getting made. I mean, these are, if you couldn't tell. It is gigantic. You can see the people down here. I mean, this is a massive. So this is the ship that was just completed and is going to head up the canals. Some of the places, Conrad, you would have loved this, like 8 inches to spare on either side as they're moving this thing through. I'd just be like, oh man. I mean, we're talking big. Here's another one getting worked on. I mean, these are just massive. This was the last evening. Pastor Thorsten had a special service at one of the churches in his parish that doesn't normally have services anymore. It's a very small chapel space. It's probably not a whole lot bigger than this room. And so this is a picture of me with the organist there on the right. And then on the left is the kind of the sacristan. She comes and sets everything up and makes sure everything is in order. And her husband, who handles some of the groundkeeping and various things like that. And then I met his internship supervisor. I think this is the last picture I have. This was the very last Sunday. And I think this was the only time we actually did this because we were late coming out of the first service. They're about 15 plus minutes apart, and you've got a 9 o'clock service at the one and 10:30 at the other. And it's like, who? As far as, so this one time we just jumped in the car and I was like, I have never done this in my life, but here you go. So I believe that is it. The road trip, which was not straight from there, this was the next day, was to Wittenberg, Germany. So you can see we started in the west, about 2 hours to Hanover, and then almost 3 hours then to Wittenberg. Wittenberg is in former East Germany. Hanover is where the bishop's office is of the Hannover Landeskirche. And so I had a chance to stop there quick on the way. Der Landesbischof. So this would be like a Bishop Eaton corollary. And here we are. It was his day off, but he was kind enough to meet with us. I think that is the last picture. Yeah. One of the things that's interesting about this, and I didn't appreciate it until that time, is that one of the priorities of Bishop Ralph Meister was changing the sabbatical policy there. The sabbatical policy had been very academic. If you're going to take 3 months off, you're going to go to the university, you're going to take a class, you're going to do this kind of thing. And when he came in, he said, they need some Sabbath. Tell me what you want to do. You want to ride your bike around Europe? Tell me about it. And so Thorsten was actually one of the first pastors to kind of take advantage of this new openness and say, hey, I'd like to go to California and learn about that. And Bishop Meister said, fantastic, you do that. And so me coming then was kind of the return. He was just very animated about it, like, this is cool, this is what I was hoping for. So so that was super fun. So he's the head bishop of one of about 13 or so Landeskirchen in Germany. It's a Lutheran church. Some of the Landeskirchen are Reformed. Most are Lutheran, though, the Protestant ones. And so it was fun. He had been on a seminary trip when he was in seminary with a pastor who serves in this synod, who I knew, which was kind of funny. He's like, how is Gabby? So, yeah. So I know we're running a little long, but any quick questions before I gotta? Correct.
They're not
Correct.
and
No.
MTA being in the same.
No, they're like states. Yeah, although they don't match up with states.
But
Saying that, yeah.
Now, Pastor, there's, like, we talk a lot about separation of church and state,
Yeah, that's not a thing.
but it's not there.
No.
It's together.
Right. There's some questions going forward because there are newer religious traditions that are like Islam. There's been, as we've read in the news, a lot of immigration to Germany. And so at what point does it make sense that they would also receive the Steuer? So they can pay taxes and it would go that way. The other thing is that there's an increasing number of people when asked if they want to pay the Steuer are saying, no, I don't want to do that. And so suddenly passing the plate feels like a holy cow, how are we going to do this? When I would tell bishops there and other pastors how many members I had and what our annual income was, they were just blown away by that concept. It's very difficult for them to do that. I have had some contact with the Hanover Landesbischof, as you saw. I think it's not impossible that in the next several years that we might not have somebody from their office or a pastor come or whatever and stay here for a bit to kind of learn about our system, because I think on some level they're seeing that as kind of the future of where they're heading. So, yeah.
Do they pass an offering plate at the service?
You know, they do. They do every week. And then at the next Sunday, they say, we raised €8.26 for this. So usually the superintendent, or sometimes maybe it's the overarching church, sends out a schedule. So the church has maybe 40 to 46 Sundays are spoken for. This is Bread for the World Sunday. This is this. And the money that is brought in goes to that purpose. So, yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, last question. So kind of his regular church services, he does one at 9 and one at 10:30. But who knows? Could be any number in the afternoon. Like there was, I think at least 2 of the Sundays I was there were afternoon worship services that we went to. It felt like we were doing church every time I turned around, but so that was very different. So, yeah. So next week will be the tail end. A bit more about. I was still in Europe for another 2 weeks, and then talk a little bit about what I did with my last weeks when I was back. That's it. Good to see you all.